name is Andrew Cardozo. I'm president of the Pearson Center, and we are delighted to have you join us today. I want to start by recognizing that the Pearson Center is headquartered on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. We thank them for their hospitality and wisdom, and we welcome our speakers and audience who are joining us from across Turtle Island. As you may know, the Pearson Center, established 9 years ago in 2013, is a progressive think tank that regularly brings together a wide cross-section of Canadians from all political parties, business, labor, and civil society, and people from all backgrounds to address the challenging economic, social, and global issues of the day. As we say, we like to bring people and ideas together. A special thank you to all our donors and sponsors, many of whom are with us today. You make these sessions possible. If you in the audience like this kind of event, do visit our website at thepearsoncenter.ca and make a donation of your own so that there can be more of these thoughtful events in these exceptional times of change. I'll just quickly mention that we have 2 webinars next week. On Monday, March the 28th, there's a session on medical isotopes, and on April the 1st, we have a session to mark the 40th anniversary of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So just briefly on the format today, there will be a moderated discussion with our 2 guests for about 30 minutes, and then we will take questions from you, the audience. So please make sure you send in your questions using the question box, and we will get as many questions answered as possible. We will end the session pretty close to 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So, innovation in Canada post-COVID, what needs to happen now? Innovation is, of course, a topic that is regularly addressed as a key to economic growth and now economic recovery. We have 2 amazing guests who have just issued a report on this topic. I will keep my introductions of them very brief so that you can hear from them. I am pleased to tell you that the Honorable Navdeep Bains was an advisory board member of the Pearson Center prior to his election in 2015. He is presently Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC, is a former Member of Parliament and Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. John Nubley is a Corporate Director and Strategic Advisor. He's a former Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And I'm delighted to tell you that our moderator today is Brian Gallant. He is currently an advisory board member of the Pearson Center. He's CEO, newly appointed, of Space Canada, and is a former Premier of New Brunswick, and during that time was also the Minister of Innovation for the province, and today remains very active in the innovation space across Canada. I see that we have a little trouble with John Nubley getting online, but we'll get the conversation started and we'll get him online as soon as we can. With that, over to you, Brian Gallant. You're on mute. Oh.
Thank you, Andrew. We appreciate it very much, the kind words, and of course for gathering us all here today. Thank you, everyone listening in. We appreciate your time, and we very much look forward, as mentioned, to your questions. So please send them in, and we will obviously get to as many as we possibly can in the short period we'll have. And I say short because obviously I know that we all want to hear from John and from Navdeep. So John is having a bit of a technical difficulty. While he was offline, Nav and I were kind of teasing, trying to say that if we send him messages, all that will do is sort of get him even more stressed about trying to connect. So hopefully that'll work out. But Nav, I mean, that you're used to this. You're used to question period. So we're gonna have to start off with you and grill you a little bit while we're waiting for John. So Nav, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. It's a delight to be here with you today and to be part of this conversation.
I have to say, and I'll mention this when John's here because I really do want him to hear it. I think it's really cool what you 2 have done. I mean, to take the time and to reflect on the work that you both did together while you were in government, and just the idea of reflecting on what you were able to do while you were there, and maybe the things that were challenged, and maybe things that need to happen now that you have time to reflect kind of post government. And I really think it's cool that the 2 of you did it coming from the perspectives that you both have, obviously, while you were in government, but the perspectives you both have now. So maybe just quickly tell me a little bit about how this came to be and why you thought it was important to sort of do this reflection piece.
Well, thank you, Brian. Hopefully John will join us momentarily, but really John deserves credit for this. He and I were talking about this post our departure. So he had stepped down from public service over 3 decades. For him and for myself, being an elected official for 13 years and being a minister responsible for innovation, science, and industry for 5 years, we've done a lot of work together. And we were just reflecting on what we did, where we are now, and kind of where things are moving post COVID. And so we felt that we would share some of our insights, talk about lessons learned. And so we put together a report for the Public Policy Forum to highlight that, and as well did an op-ed for the Toronto Star to talk about those particular issues that were important to us, what worked, what we're really proud of, and not regrets, but more importantly, things that would help future governments to build post-COVID-19.
Well, thank you, Navdeep. John, I don't know if you hear us. Let's test it out real quick. Do you hear us at all? Not sure if you hear us. We don't hear you yet.
I think he's on.
I've just joined.
Excellent.
Oh,
It's great. It's great to see you, and it's great
I'm
to
on
hear
now,
you.
but I'm live. No.
Well, it's great. It's great that you're.
Okay, for some reason I can't see you.
Okay. Well, I'm sure Andrew will send you a message to try to help out. But if you hear us, John, I mean, first off, a big thank you for joining us. And I was just chatting with Navdeep about the fact that this is a really good idea what the two of you have done. You both have brought your perspectives from the work that you have done in government, but also the work that you have done since. And you've reflected on what went well and what maybe could have went a little bit better and what's needed moving forward. So maybe just quickly, Navdeep gave you lots of the credit for the idea of doing this. Maybe just quickly talk a little bit about that process and why that was important for the two of you to do.
Well, I think that what we both saw was that we have an opportunity now coming out of COVID, and in the context, of course, of all the global uncertainties to really reset Canada's future growth and sustainable living future. And we thought that we had set the stage, if you like, with our innovation plan of 2015. And it was important to tell people the lessons that we had drawn from that experience. And we also think that that innovation plan, that comprehensive innovation plan, is a good foundation for moving forward with, of course, some new directions as a result of where we really are today.
Well, look, I want to say fantastic on both of you for doing so. I read the report. It's great. I certainly encourage anybody listening to take some time to read it. And I just want to quote this because I think it just sums up the exercise, quoting from the two of you. Building a comprehensive innovation plan requires patience and willingness to learn from and build on what came before. So I really like the idea that you're sharing that thought, but you're also, you're living that advice. So I think it's fantastic. So look, I have a few questions to sort of set the stage. First one, maybe if both of you could speak briefly to the idea of what was the context in, circa 2015 when the government changed, when Navdeep was coming into office, and when obviously the two of you started to work together. So maybe just give me a little bit of the innovation context and what that meant for the two of you and what kind of stemmed from that context in terms of the approach you both took. So Navdeep, I'll start with you and then we'll go over to John.
Sure, Brian. You're right. 2015 was a turning point in terms of having the conversation around how do we deal with low economic growth. And what I mean by that is coming out of the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, the Canadian economy was kind of sputtering along. And we really weren't generating the economic growth that we historically had seen. From 1960 up until 2000, the average annual growth rate in Canada is roughly around 4%. And post 2000 and up until today, it's roughly around 2% on average. So our annual growth rate got cut in half at the turn of the century. And so we've been struggling as a developing country. If we believe in our social programs and quality of life, we need to recognize that we also need to grow the economy in order to maintain those programs and in order to have a high standard of living. And so that was the narrative going into the 2015 election campaign, where Justin Trudeau at that time, and you may recall Paul Martin came out as well, endorsing modest deficits by investing in infrastructure, focusing on immigration and innovation to drive economic growth. And then subsequent to that election, when we were able to obtain a mandate from the Canadian public, I worked very closely with, and same with John, with his counterpart in finance, with Bill Marneau and the Economic Advisory Council. And they too highlighted the growth agenda being a real challenge. And they discussed productivity and R&D, and John can speak to that. But from my perspective, the real issue was around not only the growth agenda that we need to examine, but also an aging population. And Brian, you know this from Atlantic Canada, that there are more people now in Canada over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. And so that was a significant cause of concern in how we needed to focus on economic growth if we wanted to sustain investments in healthcare, if we wanted to, again, focus on certain social programming. And even now coming out of the pandemic, there's an expectation we'll make those investments. So this was really important back in 2015. It is obviously relevant today when we're dealing with inflation and geopolitical issues. But I think that broader context was what allowed us to put forward a very comprehensive innovation and skills plan. And you know, John can speak to some of the challenges around productivity and R&D, which were front and center and part of that conversation.
John, over to you.
Yeah, so in the context in 2015 of this growth problem, we at the department were looking at, well, what is the record on innovation? Why is it not performing better in Canada, and what are the issues? And what we saw was actually quite disturbing. I mean, we're traditionally in Canada, we're weak on commercialization, business R&D, and there we were falling further behind in relation to other OECD countries. But also in the areas where we traditionally are strong, investment in science and technology, university research, even there we were falling behind. So I think that led us to rethink what was the right paradigm, if you like, of innovation policy. And we recognized that what we've been trying to do in the past, which was to use primarily tax incentives as a way of promoting innovation and focusing on, if you like, science and technology in universities, that wasn't enough. We really needed to try some new things. So I think that's what was driving a whole rethink, if you like, and even a paradigm shift of the comprehensive innovation plan we ultimately created.
Okay, so you set the stage for circa 2015. Now let's skip to now. And one theme that is very prevalent throughout the report is the COVID pandemic for you know, very, very reasonable reasons. And you speak often about, within the report, you speak often about the influence that the pandemic has had on, and the potential influence that it's had on Canada's capacity to innovate and what it could mean for innovation policy moving forward. So talk to me a little bit about that. Share with the audience what your thoughts are, what's good, what's bad, what has the pandemic kind of showed us, lessons learned, anything that we should be picking up from this experience as we all discuss and deliberate on an innovation plan moving forward. So John, maybe we'll mix it up here. We'll start with you and then we'll go to Navdeep.
Well, I think that what I saw in COVID, and at that point I had actually left the department, whereas Navdeep can speak more directly to what happened when he was still minister during COVID, is really there were some great opportunities that emerged in the context of COVID. We saw, of course, the emergence of e-commerce, almost a bump up of that activity. Also, just the way people work is so different today, given as we're doing today, we're doing this virtually and digitally. So I think one of the things that it is important to remember is that the innovation context actually had some important new orientations, if you like, as a result of COVID. One more I'd add is just there were several instances around health and PPE where I think civil society, government, and business all came together to find solutions, and we really need to keep pushing forward in that way with this collaborative approach. Navdeep?
Yeah, just to build on John's last point there, there was a significant mobilization effort when it came to building up personal protective equipment. Brian, you recall very well, the vast majority of our personal protective equipment was outsourced. We had very limited domestic capacity for that. Virtually 99% of what Canada purchased was made in other jurisdictions. And those supply chains were being strained. Other jurisdictions were hoarding some of this stuff. And we were really challenged and struggled to build up personal protective equipment to support Canadians. And what we saw, as John said, was an amazing mobilization effort. So we use government programming and policies to support the biotech sector. So announcements in Accelerator for therapeutics, or Medicago for vaccines, or supporting the the manufacturing facility from the National Research Council. Those were important investments. But we also saw, for example, Art McDonald use off-the-shelf parts to build ventilators, or using construction house wrap as raw material for medical grade gowns. These were important endeavors that we needed to take to build on top of industries like and companies like GM that were retooling their plants to build or increase the production of masks, for example. And GM here in Ontario did over 1 million masks. So all that to say is that there was enormous mobilization. At the end of a few months, close to 50% of the government's purchasing power around personal protective equipment was invested in Canadian companies and Canadian solutions sourced locally. And so we can mobilize that quickly through the policies that we had. And as John said, the investments that we had made in science and on the supply side for a number of years, it just demonstrates that if we need to, we can pivot fast. And we can quickly mobilize our efforts to solve problems in society, to really innovate, and to find new solutions. And so that was a big takeaway.
Fascinating. So on that note, I mean, with the kind of stress test of the pandemic, or the exacerbation of trends and issues that we've seen with the pandemic, if you were, the two of you, now to reflect, and obviously you did this through the report, on some of the work that you did, the programs that you created and or enhanced, the focuses of your innovation plan, what would you maybe point to? I mean, whether the venture capital catalyst, the supercluster initiatives, what initiatives would you maybe say, okay, that went really well, and now that we know what we know, and now that we've seen sort of the innovation take place within the context of the pandemic, this is something we should emulate? Or what maybe could we have done better, and or be doing better moving forward? So that reflection, I think, is amazing that the two of you did that. And if you have some key points you'd like to share, we'd appreciate it. So John, we'll go with you, and then to Navdeep.
So in terms of building on successes, I think the three areas that we saw as where we were very happy with outcomes was, first of all, as you mentioned, the venture capital area. And there is this VCCI initiative that involved matching funds, if you like, between government and venture capitalists. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is that venture capital in Canada has really grown. I think last year was a record year at 15 billion. So that's really positive, and we got to keep pushing on that, because, again, venture capital is key to business investments in R&D. The second area where we saw lots of success was actually clean technology. SDTC, the agency responsible for sustainable development, was key to this. And in the Clean Tech Innovation Index, which is global, Canada has moved from 7th to 4th to 2nd in terms of numbers of firms in the top 100 in clean tech. So Canada's really made some progress in that area. Of course, climate change is such an important issue. We've got way more work to do, but this is very positive. And then unicorns. Canada has always had an issue of scaling up its companies from its SMEs. We've had a strong SME community, but typically the pattern is that as companies grow, they often sell out and go to the US. So we've seen some real progress in this area. I think where we saw the innovation plan supporting this was particularly on the talent side, and talent is so important in this innovation agenda. And I know Navdeep Bains has some very important points to make on talent.
Yeah, I know John knows this is an area that is the foundational piece of our comprehensive innovation and skills plan. It's the common thread throughout all our investments, which is how do you invest in people, their ideas, their ingenuity, their creativity, and how do you nurture this talent through supporting domestic talent through our education system and through our post-secondary institutions, and how do we leverage progressive immigration policies to attract the best and brightest from around the world. You know, just yesterday, the New York Times highlighted Canada as a technology hub because of the talent that we have here. And one program that we're very proud of that kind of struggled during the pandemic because of the restrictions imposed on travel was the Global Skills Strategy. And this program that we put forward as part of the innovation plan was enabling companies to be able to attract top-tier global talent through our immigration system and bring them to Canada through a visa process that would take only 2 weeks. And so that was a game changer. And Brian, you got to recollect that this was during a time of Brexit and Trump. So we were well positioned to brand Canada and to then introduce this program and attract top tier talent. And what's interesting is 25% of those visas were issued to Americans that wanted to come to Canada. So to John's point, not only were Canadian companies scaling and growing here, and we're what we call them unicorns, over $1 billion valuation, but we were able to get American talent to come to Canada to support the growth of those companies because of the opportunities that existed here. And for every one visa that we issued, it generated 10 Canadian jobs. So I think that was a huge success for sure. So that underpinned, you know, the work under Vicky that John mentioned, under clean tech for sure. So those are really, I think, successful initiatives. But one area that was exposed in terms of where we could have done better and should have done better was to deal with the digital divide and around connectivity. And again, you know this, Brian, from your time as a premier, we talked about this often when we met, is around the connectivity agenda. 50% of Canadians that live in rural communities lack high-speed connectivity. And 99% of Canadians that live in urban centers have access to high-speed internet connectivity. So there's a great disparity. So we put forward initiatives, but I think we could have done more. And we're seeing the current government now making additional investments, also investing in new technologies to service some of those remote communities through low Earth orbit satellites. So that's an area where the digital divide was exposed during the pandemic, and we should have done better. And it's a lesson learned going forward because of the digital transformation that's occurring. John talked about how we work, how we interact online now has become so pervasive in our lives, particularly throughout the pandemic, that connectivity issue needs to be addressed.
Well, so much I want to unpack there. First off, Navdeep, thank you for mentioning the space sector. So I only have to reinforce shamelessly the plug and say that, of course, the space sector can play a role helping with the digital divide. Also, the prevalence in which we are now working virtually, like John, you mentioned, you know, and we want to be connected. Like we saw, John, you got in there, you know, it took a few minutes, but we got in there. So what's nice is everybody understands and we've all been there and people are more flexible. One thing that I find really interesting is the aspect of talent, because that was pre-pandemic, a huge topic, a huge challenge, a huge opportunity. And with the pandemic, clearly that trend has continued. The role immigration can play for talent, sort of the direct line between immigration and talent, I think is often understood. But when it comes to innovation with different perspectives and people from different parts of the world coming together and colliding with their ideas and their views really help foster an innovative space too. So that's something I think important to highlight. I thought there was really something interesting that I want to talk about from the report, because I had the sense that people are very well attuned to the fact that governments, provincial and federal, play a role when it comes to talent. What I thought was really interesting of your report, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, is the idea that governments have a role to play in de-risking investments in R&D, de-risking investments in technology. I think that's a fantastic part of the report that you highlight. The SIF program, so the Strategic Innovation Fund, I know is something that the space sector has used. I know that many have used and in some ways is definitely helping do that. What else can be done? I mean, is SIF the kind of answer to de-risking the investments we want to see the private sector making in innovation and R&D and research, or is there something else that we should be doing? Is there complementary to one another? So Nav, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to John.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Brian. Just on talent very quickly, I want to give you credit for the Atlantic Pilot Project. You may recall that was another initiative that we used to attract talent to Atlantic Canada, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting tech companies growing in that in those communities because of that initiative. So kudos to you and the other premiers at that time for stepping up and working with the federal government in this space. And you're right. I think, you know, in the R&D side of it, this is a key cause of concern. Going back to what we discussed earlier around the productivity agenda, we're lagging behind our US counterparts when it comes to productivity, significantly lagging. And so, of course, we want to invest in reskilling and upskilling to make sure we have a workforce that's efficient. We want to look at technology adoption, but we need to see companies also invest more in research and development to improve our productivity. And we rank 22 amongst the OECD countries, and that number hasn't budged. And that is a serious cause of concern. There are certain sectors that do well. So space, for example, and I thought it was important to highlight that, is the most intensive R&D sector in the Canadian economy. Like, it by far punches well above its weight. So we realize that one way to unlock some of that capital, to unlock some of that money off the balance sheets for many of these companies, is through a public-private partnership. And you're right, the Strategic Innovation Fund has done that. Traditionally, it did that in the auto sector, in the aerospace sector. Today, we saw a significant announcement around batteries that are going to be built, lithium-ion batteries in Windsor. It's a $5 billion investment in volumes, and that's a function of the government stepping up through the Strategic Innovation Fund. But what I think is also important to note is the next major challenge that we're seeing as a society, and that hasn't gone away. I know we're dealing with war and what's happening in Ukraine. I know we're dealing with inflation, but the climate crisis. This is a serious cause of concern. We saw a lot of pledges and commitments in COP26. So in order for companies to invest in this space, the government has introduced a net zero accelerator fund. Actually, I started that when I was a minister, but there's more capital in that space. There's talk of using tax credits for carbon capture, utilization, and storage as well. So I think it's a combination of both programming and tax credits that can unlock a lot of the capital off these balance sheets, particularly with this energy transition that we're seeing, because a lot of ambition, a lot of pledges. Now we're going to see the action. We're going to see companies putting forward concrete proposals and ideas, and they may be reluctant to make those investments. And I think government can play a role to help the economics work and to really make Canada a world leader in some of these climate tech initiatives.
Well said. John?
So let me just build on what Navdeep said. I mean, the Strategic Innovation Fund is definitely completely designed to de-risk investment in R&D. Business R&D in Canada is sort of like Achilles heel as we compare ourselves to other countries. What we did is we broadened the program to cover all sectors. Innovation of this kind can happen in all sectors. For example, agriculture, I think, is a huge opportunity for Canada, precision agriculture, protein development. Some of the great investments, though, and they don't always get the attention at least we think they might deserve, is there was investment in stem cells in Vancouver, investment in Carbon Cure, which is originally a Nova Scotian company producing carbon sequestration and storage and cement use. Autobotics, which is a firm in Alberta, which produces logistics and optimization processes in a number of areas. Alesis, which is a very interesting project where really we've eliminated in aluminum production emissions, and Canada is the leader and holds the patents for that, and companies in the US have actually allowed those patents to come to Canada. So some great projects that perhaps Navdeep and I should have given more profile to. And then I'd just add, there is the Supercluster program where, again, we're trying to give business the lead in developing clusters of activity. We've got 5 across the country oceans, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, proteins, and digital. Of course, what we're trying to do is create technology consortia and model, if you like, what happens in Silicon Valley and Boston. These areas of cluster activity have tremendous contribution to GDP. I'll just cite one example of the superclusters in the oceans area is Kraken. This is a project which is really benefiting a wide range of sectors: fisheries, offshore oil and gas, aquaculture, offshore wind, and it's tracking ocean activity. We're using Kraken's expertise and the involvement of other SMEs in the process. So again, the development of these clusters are also an important aspect of supporting innovation in Canada.
Well, thank you, John, and it's great to hear something coming out of Atlantic Canada as an example. I want to talk a little bit about de-risking through procurement. The report speaks of procurement, so I definitely want to give the two of you the chance to maybe chat a little bit about some of the reflections you've had on the role that procurement has played on innovation and could play moving forward here in Canada. And I just maybe to just kind of frame it a bit, I mean, there's the idea that, especially for a lot of startups and tech-based businesses, having governments be their anchor customer, especially in the early days, so they're able to obviously have revenue, but also test out their products and services and improve and learn from that experience. And then, of course, the credibility it gives them, especially internationally, when they look to markets around the world, to be able to say that they have their government as a customer plays a big role as well in their early days. So what could we do? Well, procurement's complicated, of course, but so what are there any mechanisms to help have the federal government and other governments be able to be that type of anchor customer for startups and the tech-based businesses in Canada? Navdeep, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, no, I think your characterization is a good one, Brian. Being that customer is so important, it opens so many doors up for new companies, new tech companies. And I think you've seen it firsthand at DMZ and the work that you've done there. And I would say that for us, that was really important. That's why we created the Innovative Solutions Canada program, which was designed to help the government go forward with to the public essentially and say, here's a set of problems that we have in our department. We need new solutions. We need new ideas. We would help with the proof of concept. We'll help with the prototype and spend up to $1 million, and then we'll have a purchase order at the end of it. The program in concept made a lot of sense. There was a lot of goodwill, but the execution and implementation has been challenging. And that speaks to not necessarily the fact that the program was designed poorly. It's just the culture within procurement to go to a low-cost provider off the shelf, and it's not necessarily business friendly for the tech sector. And so this is a lesson learned of how do we re-examine that and show more ambition in this space. Look, we do this very well when we're out there purchasing ships or jets through our industrial technology benefits program, and you're familiar with that through the space sector. So we really leverage our purchasing power to support Canadian companies. Why don't we do that in other purchases that we make? You know, if you take defense and military out, for example, we still spend $9 billion purchasing goods and services. And so there's a lot of opportunity to support Canadian technology, Canadian ingenuity. And so I think we need to re-examine the Innovative Solutions Canada program, figure out why it doesn't have a greater uptake, how we can implicate more Canadian technology companies, and how we can make it more friendly for SMEs.
Great points, John.
Well, Navdeep and I agreed that procurement is one area where we should have done better, and the government moving forward needs to do better. Just to add one point beyond what Navdeep said. In the small business area, there are several programs, huge demand for it. And the truth is, the money isn't there behind it. So there's again, lots of opportunity for the Government of Canada to improve procurement for small business, military procurement, including space, and then this Innovative Solutions Program, which is trying to really promote new technology solutions to procurement.
Okay, so a good question here from the audience that I'll put to the two of you. This is something I know that we're all thinking about. How do we include more diversity in the innovation space? How do we get more women and girls in STEM? Some would say STEAM. How do we ensure that we're fostering an ecosystem that allows all Canadians to be able to participate? And as I mentioned before, not just because of kind of the moral obligation to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to succeed and reach their full potential. But for innovation, we want people with different perspectives sitting at the same table, right? So Navdeep, I'll start with you and then go over to John.
No, you're right, Brian. Diversity of ideas and perspectives helps create new ideas, new solutions. That's what innovation is about. You want to avoid groupthink. You want to make sure that you have cutting edge ideas, that you're looking at new ways so you can continue to be competitive, gain market share, be more productive. That's important, especially when we're talking about inflation. How do we reduce those inflationary pressures? And that boils down to being more productive. And so the productivity agenda is critical now more than ever, I think. And so we got to leverage our strength, which is diversity in Canada. But they got to be not only there in terms of just representation, but included in the decision making, empowered to have impact. And so, you know, we started off with programs like coding, as you highlighted, to look at digital skills at a young age, from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12, working in partnership with the not-for-profit sector so that we deliver the programming through them, not to impede on provincial jurisdiction. As you can imagine, that's a bit of a challenge in that space, with the focus on young girls and looking at those Indigenous communities or people of color that have fallen through the cracks historically. And so very much designed with a very inclusive concept. And we saw that when the program was delivered. Also, with regards to, you know, leadership, one of the initiatives that I was so proud of is the 50-30 challenge. And this was about companies signing up saying they're going to make a commitment to, at the board level and at the management level, to have gender parity and have 30% of their teams, both again at the board and management level, reflect diverse communities. And so when you have that kind of diversity in senior decision-making positions, that too is good for innovation. That is good to, again, leverage the diversity that we have and empower them to make decisions. So those are two programs that we're very proud of, but of course more needs to be done. The stats are very clear. There's still not enough women on boards, still underrepresentation of minorities at the leadership level of companies, particularly in the technology space. So we have a lot more work to do.
Well, thank you, Navdeep. John?
Yeah, so we have a lot more work to do. Our initial plan was based on being inclusive. There are a number of programs for women entrepreneurship, Indigenous entrepreneurship. More recently, there's been attention, of course, to Black business and support for that. Again, we had some good initiatives, but going forward, we do need to do way more. And it's really pretty simple at the end of the day. Diversity of people is good business sense, good innovation practices, because it leads to diversity of ideas. So lots of work to do, and I think we're all committed to ensure innovative, inclusive, comprehensive plan.
Well said, John, and eloquently explained the benefits. I want to take a few questions from the audience, put them together, because I know these are elements that you talked about in your report. The climate change crisis, supply chain issues, which we're all living every single day right now through the pandemic, and the digital economy, which are all things you've already chatted about. But these are the three things, please correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of come out in the report as the challenges that we need to sort of guide our innovation prowess to figure out. Are these our moonshots? Are these the things that we should be talking about every single day and essentially be saying all of the innovation that we are trying to foster should be geared towards these moonshots, figuring out how we're going to mitigate and combat climate change, improving our supply chain resiliency, and of course, doing everything that we can to provide access to high-speed and fiber-like internet so people can be connected for the economic opportunities it creates and obviously the social benefits. So are these the three things we should be focused on? John, we'll go to you first on this one and then to Navdeep.
Yeah, so we say in our report that these are the three priorities coming out of COVID, and that any comprehensive innovation plan has to address these issues. So climate change, sustainability, and needs to build on the work of the Strategic Innovation Fund and emissions reductions related to that, but also supply chain resiliency. Clearly, there's issues related to critical minerals, for example, that's emerged as we've come out of COVID, and indeed lots of issues related to the digital economy and where things are manufactured. We want to have them manufactured in North America at least, or within the democratic world, not just China. We need diverse sources. So these are the areas that, including digital, that we really need to focus on, I think. And I like your reference to moonshots. The take I'd put on that is sometimes in Canada we are careful and not always as risk-taking as we like. But in these areas, we really need to look for significant change and disruption and try to be world leaders in specific niche areas so that Canada can be a global leader in innovation. So it's that ambition that moonshot concept captures that I think needs to be built on in these three areas.
Well said, John. Navdeep?
Yeah, no, I agree with John wholeheartedly. Of course, we wrote the report together, so there's very little separation there in terms of our views. I would just quickly add on with regards to the digital aspect, the importance of technology adoption to improve productivity, to look at new and emerging technologies and continue to keep our eye on 5G. And then, of course, when we're talking about the digital transformation, trust is so critical. Especially in this era where people feel like they're losing control of their data and privacy. And so updating our marketplace frameworks, particularly PIPEDA, to make it compliant with GDPR. I introduced legislation during my tenure. I think that's low-hanging fruit. And of course, work in IP and looking at how do we develop more IP literacy. All this as part of the broader digital agenda is critical. And so I think this is an exciting part going forward where Canada can continue to lead.
Thank you, Navdeep. Andrew is doing the virtual version of kind of pulling me off the stage here. But I do have one question, and it'll be a bit of an opening for John and Navdeep to provide their final comments, if that's okay with you, Andrew. So I like this question for the two of you because in your report, and again during this discussion here today, you are giving yourselves constructive criticism, which I think is fantastic, and I think it's really commendable, and I thank you for doing that. So because you've done that, I think you've earned the right to be able to give some advice to your successors. And if you were to say, here's something that we had learned, here's something now given the context that has changed since 2015 that we believe should be the focus or done moving forward, what would that piece of advice be? So for John, you'd be giving it to your successor, the Deputy Minister. Navdeep, you would be giving it to, I'm sure, a friend of yours, the new minister, or I guess the minister now, I should say. So John, what would that one piece of advice be based on all the reflections that you've done?
So my successor is Simon Kennedy. So I would say, Simon, don't get bogged down in the details and doing one-offs. Think about the comprehensive innovation agenda. It's about talent, it's about science and technology, it's about building businesses, and it's about simplifying programs. Deliver that.
I feel almost like, John, we just taped the cameo, right? Like this is going to be for Simon's birthday or something. I mean, this is kind of a terrible message for his birthday, John, but I mean, other than that, probably good advice nevertheless. So that was awesome.
I'm sure Simon will love my advice, yeah.
Fair enough. Navdeep, now you get the chance to do this wonderful cameo here for your friend here.
Oh, well, you're absolutely right. I have a lot of time for Minister Francois Philippe Champagne. He's doing amazing work. And I would say to him, look, Minister, it's important, as my deputy minister said, to be very comprehensive. This is not simply about ISED. This is about getting other departments, other levels of government, the private sector on board if you truly want to succeed. So it's got to be comprehensive, and it requires a partnership model.
Well, thank you very much, John Nedvy, for the discussion today, but also, again, thank you for the reflection. I think it's a wonderful exercise you've done, and I really hope it's something that is going to be emulated by others. It's helpful for those that are there now, but also to have the record of what happened in those years, and people can build on it. So kudos to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, all of you. Brian, thank you for your brilliant moderating as usual. I think you've covered a lot of issues, and today's session was really quite interesting. The report is an important one because you don't often get a minister and deputy who have taken the country through an important area and then reflected on it at the end of it. So that's a huge a service that you've done to us. John Nubley, the first time that you've joined us, please come again. Thank you for your service to Canadians during your time in the public service. Navdeep, thank you for joining us again at the Pearson podium. You've been with us a few times during your time in office. I hope you'll join us again. But I also want to say to you, thank you for your service to Canadians. Public service is not easy. You folks put yourself in the public eye. You do a lot of good stuff, but you get a lot of brickbats. For all of that, thank you for putting up with all of that, and at the end of it, making some real differences in innovation in Canada and politics. We live in strange times these days, and I think it gives us a chance to stop a little more and think about what politicians do have to do put up with, and the kind of lives they do, the kind of things they do to make our lives better. So thank you, Navdeep Bains, for your service. It's much appreciated, and we look forward to seeing more of you. Thank you to our audience too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Till next time.